Hello there, Na'alelan. We begin Parshat Shelach, Bezer Hashem. Today's shir is Leila Nishmas Rachale Bas V'chaim Si Ala Shalom. Thank you, Mrs. Bamzer, for helping out in the studio. Your care, your attention, your devotion is beyond description. Okay, I'm going to begin today's class with a summary of the Parsha. Follow with me as I describe in detail what occurs, actually not in detail, but rather in a synopsis, and then we'll look at the major points of our Parsha. The Bnei Israel had reached Kadesh in the wilderness of Paran. Then 12 representatives, each one from each tribe, was sent by Moshe to explore the promised land of Canaan and to report back to the condition of its populace, the dwelling places in the soil. We shall soon see the difference between if these representatives were scouts, were they spies, but we'll save that for just a little while from now. Yehoshua and Caleb are among them in this first group of Meraglim, which is a term which is only applied later on, which means spies. The Meraglim secretly crossed the mountain path of the Negev in southern Canaan and traversed the land until the extreme north. They returned to the assembly after an absence of about 40 days, which really was very, very expeditious. We'll see soon why. Bringing with them huge clusters of grapes, pomegranates, and figs as evidence of the land's fertility. However, 10 of the Meraglim claimed that it would be impossible for Bnei Israel to conquer Canaan. They felt that the cities were too strongly fortified and the inhabitants were too powerful. Caleb and Yeshua disassociated themselves from this pessimistic report and separated themselves from the spies as well, and counseled that the people should march on, and we will be able to capture the land of Canaan. The people, however, sided with the majority report, and they lost heart. We'll soon see how it makes a difference if you have 2 against 10. Well, actually, one will cancel out the other. But the people had lost heart. They had broken into an open rebellion and proposed the election of a leader to lead them back to Egypt of all places. They refused to listen to the renewed pleas of Caleb and Yeshua, and they threatened to stone them. God was very angered by this lack of faith, and he expressed his intention to destroy the people and to form a new nation exclusively from Moshe's descendants. Once again, Moshe intercedes on their behalf, successfully on behalf of Bnei Israel. But while the destruction was avoided, Bnei Israel was then condemned to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. One day, which will match each and every day of the spies, were gone. They had gone to search the land until all the age of 20, with the exception of Caleb and Yeshua, will have died. In other words, from all those from that generation which dispatched the spies, the only ones to remain alive that were over the age of 20 only was Caleb and Yeshua. And then the new generation would enter the promised land to witness the fulfillment of God's promise. The 10 Meraglim who had delivered the negative report died of a sudden plague. The people but lately realized their error, attempted to go by themselves to the land of Israel. But they ignored Moshe's warning that God would not be with them, and they were very soundly defeated by the tribes of Amalek and Canaan who lived in that area. The people were assured that their descendants would possess the land of Israel, and God told Moshe to prescribe the following law which would become effective at that time, which is, the meal offerings and drink offerings should accompany the offering of animals, and a part of the dough called challah should be set aside for Hashem. The mitzvah of removing a portion of bread, which is called the mitzvah of challah. Incidentally, the reason why we call challah, which we have Friday night, challah, is by virtue of the fact that this bread, we don't call it lechem because, by definition, if it's bread which you're going to eat and be able to establish a meal upon, it will be large enough that the challah must be taken from it. Hence the name challah for the challah. And if the congregation practice, let's start again. And there's the mitzvah to take off part of the dough called challah, and that should be set aside for God. And that if the congregation practiced idolatry by error, it should atone by way of a sacrifice. While in the wilderness, the people found a man violating the Shabbos. We'll deal with this in greater detail. The man was held in custody until God could declare to Moshe that the man should be stoned by death by the congregation. And here we have the first exposure of the idea of a prison in Torah law. We know that there are Torah punishments. A person shall die by stoning, by sword, by choking. There's 4 different methods. We know many things, but how do we know such a thing as a prison? The answer is when they found this man, they weren't sure what punishment should be meted out to him. So in the interim, he was placed in a jail. So we see there's such a thing as a holding pen, as a jail. Finally, lo tzitzis be worn on the 4 corners of one's garments was given to remind people of the need to observe God's commandments at all times. That's our brief synopsis, and now we go into a more detailed synopsis of our parsha. Okay, our parsha begins with God telling Moshe to send the spies. Now it seems from the way the word is shlach lecha as a rather direct commandment, go ahead and send out, dispatch the spies, as if the people were acting on behalf of an order which God himself had instructed the people. But that in fact was not the case, as Rashi makes very clear. The Torah is not a storybook, and there's not necessarily chronological order. Later in Devarim, in the very beginning, we see that people demanded spies be sent, and Moshe agreed reluctantly. And we have in Yehoshua, this is in the second chapter of Yehoshua, that Yehoshua sends two anonymous spies to Yericho, who bring back their report to Yehoshua himself. And as Avi Geller raises the question, why did God command that the spies be sent, as implied over here, or was it the people's idea? And the second question would be, why did Moshe send 12 very famous men who report to the